Okay, I just wanted to make sure you can hear me. So, welcome to the week 4 live lecture. Dr. Campbell here with you again this week. For week 4, we're at the halfway point. Before we get started with the week 4 material, I wanted to make a few announcements, reminders, if you will, related to some things that we have actually spoken about previously and that you should have read about when you're looking at your textbook assignments. So, the very first thing is that I know you guys already know this, but I just finished grading the week 3 quizzes, and I saw a trend with a few things that I thought I need to point out. Number one, coding requires attention to detail. It's not something that you can do um, in a matter of 5 minutes. So when I was grading this just a little while ago, one of my sections, the mistakes that were made in a lot of cases were from failure to follow um, um, the rules, the level of detail that's required. And so, what do you mean by that? Some examples that I saw were some people were coding, not sure how this happened, but signs and symptoms that were related to a disease. So, for example, patient had neoplasm related pain. And as we discussed last week, there's a guideline that tells us how to code that, but then that person also coded pain. So remember the guidelines state signs and symptoms that are related to a disease are not coded separately. The other thing that I saw was that some people were not only listing their final code, but were also listing codes that they saw along the way. And you're probably like, well, what do you mean by that? So this is what I mean. So like, let's say they looked at a main term and there was a code directly behind the main term. You know, the code directly behind the main term is known as a default code. So they would pick up the default code, and then let's say there was a subterm. Then they would get the code for the subterm. And then let's say that there was a subterm underneath the subterm, which was your actual final code. They would pick that code up as well. Again, remember, we're only looking for the final code, not all the codes along the way. Okay. The other issue that I saw was missing the an additional digit. So I just have to ask everyone that's here today, how do you know in the tabular listing when an additional digit is required? So you're in the tabular listing. Yeah, in the tabular listing. So remember I said pay attention to detail, pay attention to the question I was asking. So typically in the tabular list, not the alphabetical index. Um, so let me just stop because April said this is getting hard to deal with. So let me just make sure everybody is clear. The coding process begins in the alphabetical index. And in the alphabetical index, you see that there is a hyphen behind a code if it's not at its highest level of specificity. That's in the alphabetical index. But in the tabular listing, which is where we must verify our code 100% of the time, you guys are absolutely correct. In the tabular listing, there is that check mark. So if you have a code that has a check in front of it, check fourth digit, check fifth digit, check sixth digit, check seventh digit, that lets you know that the code you're looking at is not correct. So let me just pause right here and see if there's someone that does not understand that. If you have that check mark in front of your code, that is not the correct code. You got to drop down to where your code has the correct number of digits. So if you don't, if you're all good with that concept, don't respond. I really just want to tap into the people who are, they don't understand that concept, because that's very, very important. That if your code says check fourth, check fifth, check sixth, check seventh, that you're going to drop down and look at the options. So here's an example. Last week we had diagnoses for conditions of the eyes and the ears. Well, most of us, I'm going to say all, because sometimes people are born without certain body parts. Most of us have two eyes and two ears. And last week we saw a lot of situations where the code that you were looking at in the tabular list said check fifth digit, and that fifth digit was related to whether or not it's right, left, or bilateral. So if that code that you're looking at is telling you check for an additional digit, you're going to go underneath in that same family that's indented over a little bit, and it's going to tell you, hey, left, right, or bilateral, or unspecified. So does everybody understand that concept? Because it's very important when people say, I don't understand this, I don't get this. One problem could be that you are not reaching out to your instructors for assistance. All instructors are required to have office hours. All instructors have emails. All classes have the Q&A area. You guys pay too much money to not ask questions. Do not sit there and suffer behind that computer, because at the end of the day, and I can tell you as someone who went to school online, who has went to college for many years, at the end of the day, it is the college student that is responsible for that student loan debt. So, just make sure that you're asking questions. Lots of instructors will say to me that they don't hear from you, that you don't ask any questions whatsoever. Yet, when we look at your quizzes, it's very clear that you're not understanding something. And so it's so important to reach out. Okay, other things that I saw. I saw a few scattered instances where the body part was the left and the code that was selected was the right. So from my perspective, that is really related to not paying attention to detail. The next type of error that I saw was adding additional digits that are not applicable. So for example, if you go to your coding manual and you look at code B20, which is for AIDS, that is as specific as that code can get. There is no hyphen behind that code. There is no check additional digit behind that code. B20 is as specific as it gets. As the coder, we don't get to add digits on where they don't apply. So I think one code that I saw when I was grading was F22, where several folks put a 0 behind it, and there was no 0. Okay. Other things, and I'm not sure why I saw this, but I'm still seeing some people listing ICD-9 codes on their quiz, ICD-9 codes in the discussion boards. And I just need to remind you that you only should be reading the pages in each chapter that are listed in the course syllabus. You should not be reading the entire chapter. I've said this on many occasions, and yet I'm still seeing people do that. Also, if you do not have a physical coding manual and you are using the electronic coding manual, we have given instructions for that particular manual. If you don't have those instructions on how to use the electronic coding manual, you can reach out to me and I would be more than happy to give those to you. I'm going to put my email address in the box for those that are not in my class. But if you don't have a physical coding manual and you are using the electronic coding manual and maybe you're doing something wrong, I would be happy to provide you with some pictures that actually walk you through each and every step. Okay, I'm almost done with my list. I really don't want to be on here for 2 hours tonight, so I got to hurry up. We already talked about highest level of specificity. Um, and bear with me, I was making a list while I was grading. Default code and non-essential modifiers. So when you're in the alphabetical index and you look up a term, sometimes that main terms are in bold print, sometimes that main term has words in parentheses behind it. Those words in parentheses are known as non-essential modifiers. And what they mean is they don't have any bearing on your final code assignment, but those are just supplementary terms that condition can be known as. So one of the questions on the quiz, when you go to that main term, the word chronic was in parentheses directly behind that main term. And then there was a code listed directly next to that, which is called the default code. There's a guideline in your guidelines on default codes. And then underneath it, there were no other options for chronic. So that was the only option that you can select, which was that default code. And this person in my class kind of typed in the box, I'm unable, there is no code, that there's an error or something like that. So just know that in some instances, your quote-unquote subterm could be a non-essential modifier that is directly behind the main term. Okay, I think I got... Oh, and then the two last things. Not following guidelines. The guidelines are very important in terms of ensuring that we're coding based on guidelines so that we are selecting the most applicable, accurate diagnoses. I saw some situations where the patient had neoplasm-related pain, but the person just selected a regular pain code when the scenario said neoplasm-related code. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention was that in Chapter 1, you learned about the concept of NOS and NEC. NOS meaning not otherwise specified, which really equals unspecified, and then NEC, not elsewhere classifiable. So NEC means the doctor just flat out did not give you any additional information. That's NOS. NOS, not otherwise specified. The doctor did not give you any other information. So NOS equals unspecified by the doctor. Whereas NEC, not elsewhere classifiable, means that the doctor gave you the information that you need, but the classification system doesn't have a unique code. So, well, what do we do in that situation? Well, one example from the quiz was a patient that had, it was epilepsy, and it was grand mal epilepsy. Okay, so you're in your alphabetical index and you're looking for grand mal. It's not there. You're like, well, what do I do? Well, first you can look up grand mal and see if what that means, because there could be another word that the classification system is using. But then also explore the other terms that are in the scenario. So that patient had generalized grand mal epilepsy, right? And when you go to epilepsy and then generalize, you don't see grand mal. However, you see the words, and let me type this in the chat box because this is the exact word that you would see, is specified, not elsewhere classifiable. You use that when the doctor has specified the condition, but the classification does not have a unique code for that condition. And what do I mean by that? Let's say there are 1 million conditions in the United States. There isn't 1 million codes. There isn't a one-to-one relationship between every disease and every code in the classification system. So in the instances where there isn't a unique code, but your doctor has further specified the condition, we have the option of specified, not elsewhere classifiable, not elsewhere classifiable in the coding manual. Okay, those were all the things that I saw. And before I move on, does anybody have any questions on what I just presented? And I just thought it was beneficial to take the time to talk about some of the errors that I was seeing. I will also say I saw a lot of people with 100s on this last quiz as well. So I was very, very happy about that. Lots of people with that had gotten perfect scores in my section. So CC and MCC in the coding manual. And let me grab my coding manual 1 second. At the very bottom of the pages, and this was not about what I was talking about, and I'm not sure if you're in my class. That's a very good question. That's a perfect example of a question that you should be asking your instructor when you are seeing things like that in the coding manual. Now, first let me tell you, everybody doesn't have the same exact what I call tips in their coding manual. And let me explain why. CC and MCC is something that we've been talking about since, let's see, week 2, when we started talking about MSDRGs. Remember that week when I had mentioned that I had a list of MCCs and CCs, and those were secondary diagnoses that can impact your MSDRG. Anybody remember that week? I can't remember which week it was, but that was one of those times when I said, hey, if you want the list, and if you haven't been listening to all of the live lectures, you might not remember that, or you listened and you kind of forgot, but it was one of those situations where I said, I'm not gonna post the list. If you want it, email me and I'll send it to you. So basically, MCC is a major comorbid condition. And if a diagnosis is a major comorbid condition, it actually changes the, increases the MSDRG payment when attached with a principal diagnosis. Whereas a CC, comorbid condition, can also impact the MSDRG payment, but not as much as the MCC does. So do you guys recall when you were calculating your MSDRGs, do you recall seeing a pound sign in front of some of your secondary diagnoses? You might not have been paying a lot of attention, but this week, pay attention to some of the codes that you list as primary or secondary. They have, I'm sorry, principal, secondary. They have symbols in front of them, and it could be like 2 asterisks. Anybody remember seeing that? I'm going to ask you this again next week. So those symbols actually have some meanings. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to upload into the files area what those symbols mean, because I know some of you want to see them. But basically, let's see, how do I want to explain this? The encoder knows which diagnoses are MCCs or CCs, and therefore changes your MSDRG from a tier 3 to a tier 1 or a tier 2. Does that make sense? The encoder knows that. So the physical book does the same thing depending on which one you have. So if you have the one for a hospital, it provides the CC or the MCC next to codes that are CCs or MCCs, whereas the encoder has it built in. Okay, so now you remember. Okay, so first thing I wanted to do tonight is I really wanted to give you guys some exposure to questions that you can see on either the CCA or the RHIT exam that are coding in nature, because I'm hoping to give a wake-up call to those people who are not really putting in the amount of effort that this course requires. And I'm hoping that those of you who are attending live or are listening to the recordings, that you will be the champions that will, in your roundtables or in your discussion boards, say to your classmate, hey, I see you're struggling on that concept that was covered in the live lecture. And the reason that I say that is that there are a lot of people. There are 19 of you on this meeting tonight. There's probably another 10 or 15 that listen to the recordings, but then there are about 200 people that are taking this class. And not taking advantage of the resources that are available, in the long run, it hurts those that don't take advantage of it. And I know a lot of people say, well, I work several jobs and I have this going on and I have that going on. But again, you guys pay a lot of money. These resources have been made available to you, and it's a shame to not use them. But anyway, we're going to act like you are taking your CCA exam or your RHIT exam, and I'm going to ask you some sample questions, and I'm hoping at the end that you have a different perspective on a few things. All right, first question. Condition established after study to be chiefly responsible for the admission of the patient to the inpatient hospital. A, B, C, or D? So this is like one of the things that we've been talking about in the coding roundtable. Week 2, week 3, now week 4. This is something that you read in chapter 3 in your textbook. So the correct answer is D, the condition that's established after study. So I took this question directly from the guidelines. And if you don't know this definition today, May 23rd, we got ourselves a problem. That says to me that somewhere along the way, something happened. Either you haven't had an opportunity to listen to the live lectures. I saw that Margaret posted a little while ago that she kind of had to learn the hard way that these lectures were designed to help you be successful. And what really bothers me the most is when I see people saying, I don't understand, I don't understand. However, you don't reach out for help, and you sit there in confusion for 8 weeks. And so, in the guidelines, and this is something that's very important to know, when you go and take your national exam, they're going to use terminology from guidelines. And I'm glad Stephanie typed that in this box. Those of you who are already working in some capacity in healthcare, please know that on national exams, they have to have consistent language that they use on the exams. And so principal diagnoses is used for inpatient. That was the key in that scenario. And first listed is used for outpatient per the guidelines. While organizations may use other terminologies, when you guys go and take your national exams, they have to have a credible source to trace the question back to. And what someone does at their organization is not what they trace it back to. The guidelines actually say the word either principal or first listed. Okay, next question. Patient is admitted for chemotherapy for metastatic breast cancer to the liver. The patient had a mastectomy 4 months ago, and this is her third round of chemo. What's the principal? So I chose the questions for tonight very carefully, and I'm going to tell you my ulterior motive. My ulterior motive was to see how many people were really into their guidelines. And there is a guideline, yes, there is a guideline that states, there is a guideline, there is a guideline. Remember I told you to have those guidelines available? Let me turn over to my guidelines. You guys know I have that physical copy. I'm on page 27, and it says, if a patient admission encounter is solely for the administration of chemotherapy, immunotherapy, or radiation therapy, assign code Z51.0, C5111, or Z51.12 as the principal. And then it goes on to further state the malignancy for which the therapy is being administered should be assigned as a secondary diagnosis. So a couple of things that we saw with this question. A, when you're taking quizzes, national exams, read the question. Number two, you have to know the guidelines. Very, very, very important. Okay, next up. So the correct answer is C, is the correct answer per the guidelines. That is the correct answer. Okay, next question. A patient is admitted for an arthroscopic medial meniscectomy because of a torn medial meniscus. Following admission but prior to surgery, the patient goes into AFib, which necessitates transfer to the ICU. The meniscectomy is canceled and the patient was treated and is now doing well. Which condition should be sequenced first? And the key, which condition should be sequenced first? Okay. How many of you have your guidelines in front of you? Okay. If you have the physical guidelines, the 115 pages, go over to page 97. And if you have your physical coding manual, you guys have different variations, but it's probably on page, I don't know, 28. But look for the guidelines on selection of principal diagnoses, letter F. That's section 2. Selection of principal diagnoses, letter F. So I don't have, Jennifer, my hospital book with me right now. I only have the physician's version. So I'm not sure if the page number is the same, but I'll tell you. But at this point, you guys should be more than familiar with the guidelines. It's page 28. I was right. That's kind of scary. That's kind of scary that I know the page numbers. So in the physical coding manual, page 28, in the big fat packet, 115 pages, page 97, letter F, which reads as follows. Sequence as the principal diagnoses the condition which after study occasioned the admission to the hospital. Sequence as the principal diagnoses the condition which after study occasioned the admission to the hospital. So the correct answer is B. B. And let me just, so there's a couple of objectives that I have for you guys tonight. Attention to detail is something that we must work on. The sentence says, which condition? A meniscectomy is not a condition, it's a procedure. I put that there to trick you to see if you knew that there's no way that answer could have been correct, because it's not a diagnosis, it's a procedure. So I have had the luxury of writing test questions for AHIMA, and this is a way that we that we use to see if you're paying attention to detail. So the question says, which condition should be sequenced first? And the torn medial meniscus per the guidelines should be first. And let me just give you a little bit more on this scenario. For coding the entire scenario, your first code would be a torn meniscus. Your second code would be the Z code that shows a canceled procedure. And then your third code would be for the atrial fibrillation. Some people would flip it and say meniscus, AFib, and the Z code, but if the question asks what would you code, it would be 3 things. So first, the torn meniscus, because per the guidelines, sequence as the principal diagnosis the condition which after studying occasioned the admission to the hospital, even though the treatment may not have been carried out due to unforeseen circumstances. So first listed would be the torn meniscus. You have your 2 secondary codes, which would be the atrial fibrillation and then a Z code for the procedure not done. A few weeks ago, I gave you guys a list of main terms that lead to Z codes. And in this particular situation, you could use the main term procedure not done. Procedure not done would be the Z code. So first listed per the guidelines would be the medial meniscus. Then you would have 2 secondary codes, diagnosis codes. One for the AFib and one for the Z code that says the procedure was not done. Remember, guys, the insurance company does not have the medical record in front of them. Our codes tell a story. Why were they there today? Because they had torn meniscus. And then the torn meniscus was not done. So the Z code says procedure not done. Procedure not done. Cancel, not done. Then torn meniscus shows, atrial fibrillation shows why it wasn't done. So let me just make sure everybody has this correct. Number one, torn meniscus. And please stop typing for 1 second so I can get this in so everybody can have it. Number one, torn meniscus. Number two, you're going to have your code for AFib. And number three, you're going to have a Z code for procedure not done. Now, let me explain this to you. In the real world, it is the principal diagnosis that drives the reimbursement. You could list the Z code second, the AFib third, or vice versa, and the reimbursement is still going to be the same. It is the principal diagnosis that drives the reimbursement. So don't get so hung up on, oh, the instructor posted them in this particular order and mine were out of order. If you had all the codes and the principal in the right position, you're fine. Don't worry that they had this code second and that code third. It could have just been how, at what point they saw that particular code. So don't get hung up on, oh, I had this one third and they had that one fourth. As long as you have the correct MSDRG, you are fine. As long as you have the correct principle, you are fine. Okay, let's keep going. I said I didn't want to be on here 2 hours, but it looks like we're heading towards that. A patient was admitted for a hysterectomy because of a fibroid uterus. Following admission, but prior to surgery, the patient develops congestive heart failure, which necessitates transfer to the ICU. The hysterectomy is canceled and the patient is treated for the heart failure. Which condition should be sequenced first? A, B, C, D. Ha 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 ha! No tricking you guys. So one of the things that I'm very big on is retention of information. I immediately followed up with a question that was exactly the same as the last one. I put the conditions in the same exact order. I spent 5 minutes going over that guideline just to see what you would do. So the correct answer, most of you I could not fool. The correct answer is B. Because remember that guideline. Sequence as the principal diagnoses, the condition which after study occasioned the admission to the hospital. And the reason they came to the hospital is because of the fibroid uterus. So one thing that you guys definitely want to work on, and I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to give you a reality check. I'd rather give you a reality check now than on the day that you go and take your national exam. That's really my goal. I want, let's work out the kinks now before you go and take your national exam. Okay. Next question. The computer program that is used to assign diagnostic and procedure codes is known by which of the following terms? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so B is correct. It is the encoder. You guys are correct. Because the grouper is built into the encoder. All right, so B is it. Next up. The computer program that is used to assign MSDRGs is known by which of the following terms? The computer program. Okay, I have a question to ask you guys. Is a MSDRG a computer program? No. Again, I tried to trick you. So the answer is C. I want you to think about it like this. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, when you log into the encoder and you put in the age and you are using the DRG finder, this is a grouper. The DRG finder is a grouper. So what happens is, let me get in some codes here. Let's see. We had that patient that came in for the chemotherapy person. Z51. I'm just gonna put in Z51.0. Oh, that's the wrong, but Z51.0 is for radiation therapy, but just for discussion purposes. Let's say they came in for radiation therapy. That was the admit diagnoses. The principal diagnoses was the still the radiation therapy. If these are all the codes that you use, you select compute and it groups together the diagnoses and procedure codes and gives you your DRG. So the encoder is used to assign codes. The grouper groups your codes together to give you your MSDRG. Oh, and let's say, and remember I said that the secondary diagnoses can increase the reimbursement. So let's say, oh, I forgot my breast cancer. I'm just gonna, I don't have these codes memorized, but one second, I just wanna pop in a code for breast cancer. Oh, I was close. C50. Okay. C50.911 is what I want to use. Uh-oh. Okay, so I had forgot my cancer code because the guidelines state that has to be my secondary code. So I'm going to compute again. And did my DRG change? If you guys notice, I'm using a real live encoder. I'm not using the one that you guys have at school because I wanted to show you some money. Do you guys remember what my DRG was before I put in the cancer? If you don't, I'm going to take it out so you can see it. Okay, let me take it out. Okay, so before I took out the cancer, my DRG is 849. My weight is 1.6745. So, oops, I forgot my secondary diagnosis. So I'm going to plug it in. What was the C50.911? Okay, and once I say I forgot something, it kicks out what I put in. I select compute again. And what's my DRG? 849. What's my relative weight? 1.6745. So do you see that the secondary diagnoses is only going to affect the MSDRG if it's a MCC or a CC? And in this case, that's not the case. So let's see if I put in, let me think. Oh, I'm just going to throw in a couple of diagnosis codes. And I wanted to put one more other one in. Okay, that's good enough. Uh-oh. Oh, I didn't put it in there because I didn't say okay. Put in some diabetes. Oh, I guess it wants me to type it in. One second. I wanted to put in hypokalemia. And I wanted to put in some kind of heart condition. Okay, so I just randomly chose some diagnoses. And we know that our MSDRG was 849. It had a relative weight of like 167 and or 1.67. And so now I'm gonna say compute again. Let's see what happens. Anything happen? No. So you see how the system knows whether or not those secondary diagnoses count. And you remember me saying that what we're coding in the round table is the floor and not the ceiling, and that some organizations will want you to pick up everything. So like some organizations may say, hey, they got a allergy to sulfur, and you're like, okay, let me put that in Z88.2. Okay, so let me select compute again. What did it do? Nothing, right? So some organizations make you code everything under the sun, and some organizations will say, we're collecting data, so pick up everything. So in the round table, we're coding the floor because some organizations say we need the claims to go out of the door. So the fact that you're going to put this allergy to sulfur on every case, hey, forget that. Let's get these claims out of the door so we can get some money. And there's the symbol that I was talking about, right? Okay, we have got to we got to move. We got to keep moving because I got a lot of grading to do tonight, and I can't be on here longer than 2 hours. Some people are complaining that these are too long, but you see, we have so much information that we have to cover. I can't make it any shorter. All right, next question. So the answer is grouper. Yes, because the grouper is used to assign the MSDRG. Okay, next up. Which of the following is required to assign an MSDRG? So here's what I would do. I would say, okay, what have we used in this class? Have we used marital status? No, right? Have we used CPT codes? No. Have we used the APC? No. So the answer is D. And APC is the opposite of DRG. So in inpatient, we use a DRG. Outpatient, we use an APC. That's not this class, but the bottom line is, you know, those first three we haven't done in this class. Again, I put these questions together to see where your head is at, and hopefully you do some self-reflection. Next up. A patient is admitted for a total hip replacement because of rheumatoid arthritis. Following admission, but prior to surgery, the patient develops congestive heart failure, which necessitates transfer to the ICU. The hip replacement is canceled, and the patient is treated for heart failure. Which condition should be sequenced first? You should have known when I started giggling that there was a trick to this. I kind of threw you off your game for a little while and brought you back to the same thing we just talked about to see where your head was. So the first condition would definitely be the rheumatoid arthritis. And okay, we'll recap in a second. Which of the following surgical cases would a code editor flag as an error? And I'll let you guys look at these four options. So, one of the things that I've noticed, yeah, Aisha, one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of people that take these classes, that you treat each class like a little island and you don't pull forward information from previous classes. So one of the things I was trying to do here was to say, do you know what a terp is? And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I got to put this out there right now. How many of you are going to be taking the CCA exam because you're in the medical billing and coding program? How many of you are in that category? Okay, so those of you who are in the CCA program, the MBC program, 10 classes and you're out, you can take a medical dictionary in with you for your exam along with your coding manuals. Those of you who are HIT students, guess what? The only resource you're going to be able to take in with you is your cerebrum and your cerebellum. That is all. That's why you got to go to school for 2 years, and that's why the MBC students go for 10 classes. No code book. That is it. And you're probably wondering, well, how am I supposed to answer the coding questions if there is no code book? How in the heck am I supposed to like memorize all the questions? I'm glad you asked me that because I have some examples. Let's keep going. Which of the following is used to assign an MSDRG? Don't read too fast. Read all the options. So here's another one where I wanted to try to trick you because in letter C, I put in the word primary diagnoses. And remember I just said primary is not used. We either use principal for inpatient or outpatient. We use first listed. So C is bye-bye. Letter A has the word admitting diagnoses. Does the admitting diagnoses do anything to assign the MSDRG? No. So the correct answer is B. That is correct. The correct answer is B. So, okay, we'll regroup in a second. What? What main term root operation would be used to code the following procedure? Excisional biopsy of the breast. I'm taking you way back to ICD-10 PCS. I didn't do the live lectures for that, but I know you learned about the root operations. And the root operation is the letter C. C, 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 C. The letter C, because biopsy is biopsy is taking out part, and it's excision. You guys are too funny. Which main term root operation would be used to code the following procedure? Open cosmetic plastic repair of a deformed left earlobe. Alteration is correct. Alteration is correct. Okay. Uh-oh. Guideline alert. ICD-10, documentation of sepsis, always requires a minimum of. B, 2 codes. That is correct. That is correct. The drug commonly used to treat asthma is not B. That's what I'm going to take as soon as this lecture is over. So the correct answer is C. So you guys wonder. I'm hoping to have so many aha moments that you just walk away tonight and are like, oh, I got a new attitude. Do you wonder why you got to take all these classes and why, you know, why it is important for you to know it in this class? Uh, Mary, I'm not sure if this is your first time hanging out at the party, but I will put a little document in the files area. So spread the word because I can tell I was substituting. I guess you can use that word. I was substituting for another instructor last week, and I said these folks aren't coming to the live lectures. All right, correct answer is C. Ever. Okay. The coder might find which of the following conditions on a patient's problem list if the medication contains lorazepam. Might be what all of you have right now. I think a few of you have this right now. So the answer is A for anxiety. But again, my objective is to not scare you. My objective is really because I want you guys to be prepared. I'm trying to build awareness now so that you don't get to the end and, anyway. So, dear Dr. Smith, based on your documentation, this patient has anemia and was transfused with 2 units of blood. Also, there was a 10-point drop in hematocrit following surgery. Please document acute blood loss anemia as this patient clearly meets the criteria for this diagnosis. What type of query is this? Jamaica says dumb. It is a leading query. So those of you who have not joined the party the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about that you should have these binders full of resources. And one of the resources that I've given you are those 2 documents on the query process. So again, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to give you some, I got to get my stuff together moments to yourself. You don't got to tell me. I just want you to tell yourself, I got to get my stuff together. Because guess what? I'm not taking this test. You are, right? Okay. Next up. The patient has COPD and is on oxygen every night at home and has been on continuous oxygen since admission. Based on these indications, please indicate if you were treating one of the following diagnoses. And then they give them a multiple choice test. So what do you think about this query? I call it a love letter with a multiple choice test. So you are correct. This query is appropriate. This is a great example of how you should query the provider. Okay, next up. According to the patient's emergency room record from last week, the patient was placed on antibiotics for cellulitis of her leg. If the patient is still taking antibiotics, please document cellulitis. So per the query guidelines, this is actually an inappropriate query because we are not to introduce new information from the last visit. Okay, we don't go back to the last visits, a different hospital admission, a different office visit, and reintroduce new information. Okay, so I know you guys are busy, you work, you got dogs, cats, all that good stuff, and you're like, I haven't had a chance to read all those documents you told me to read, but I'm telling you, I have taken 7 national exams, and you have to know the material in order to take that exam. And it says last week. According to the emergency room visit from last week. What are you even doing looking at the emergency room visit from last week? So, according to the query process, you cannot reintroduce information. And the answer is absolutely yes, because you know why? Why pay all that money and have to go take it again? I'm just saying. I don't know about you, but I got a lot of student loans. I have no extra money whatsoever. And when I went to school, they didn't pay for me to take the test. I had to pay for it myself. All right, next question. For those RHIT students, this is what you can expect, but CCA, you may get some of these as well. Positive HIV test in a patient who is asymptomatic, presents with no related symptoms, and has no history of HIV infection. You see that they give you the codes in a little box with a description. All you got to do is pick the correct code. So the answer is C. CCC, because they're asymptomatic. So here's a question I have for you. What if this patient previously had an AIDS-related condition? How would that change the story? What would the first listed code be? It would be A. Hey, I see you guys know some guidelines. That is awesome. Okay, so HIT folks, stand up. You have to know your guidelines on the exam. So I know some people said, she has got to be out of her mind if she thinks I'm going to print a 115 page document of guidelines. I'm not wasting my paper to do that. And the reason that I wanted you to do that is so that you can write notes on them, so that you can get prepared for your exam. Because unfortunately, I don't know who's MBC, who's HIT, but in either case, you need to sit down and become one with these guidelines. Okay. Uh-oh, ICD-10 PCS. And I'm not going to remember next week what program you guys are in, because I'm probably dealing with about 200 students right now. Unless you email me frequently, I may not remember you. Or if you do something wrong, I remember you. Like if you keep posting ICD-9 codes, if you keep posting ICD-9 codes, I'll remember you. If you email me a lot, I'll remember you. Usually I remember the men because there's only 1 or 2, so I'll always remember Mark. Okay, so here's a PCS question. Again, you see no book, but you got your scenario, you got your codes. So on the day of the test, how would you even attack this thing here? Well, the first thing that stands out for me, left. So I would say, okay, well, it's not those two that end in a 2. Oh no, that one that the first one that ends in a 2 is not that one because that says right. And then that one that ends in a Z, that also says right. So I would not deal with that. So then I'm left with the last one that ends in a 2, and then that one that ends in a 0. Okay, so what's the difference between them? The word complete versus mid, and then hand versus upper arm. And they said it was the humerus, which makes it the upper arm. And so the final answer would be D. So, okay. What are some takeaways from this, guys? What are some things that you just had some aha moments related to those questions? And I wanted to add more questions, but we just don't have enough time. And it's not that it's hard. So let me just tell you this. One problem. How many of you watch TV? You probably shouldn't be watching TV. That might be one problem why this is hard. But there is this man that comes on TV, and I don't watch a lot of TV, but I know he's on there. But there's this man on TV, and this is what he says. Medical billing and coding. In the 6 short months, you can become a medical coder and biller, and you can work from home, and blah, 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 blah. And wait a minute, I'm like, hold up, man, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He made it seem like coding is so easy. If coding would not pay such good money if it was that easy. Okay, so I know some people that take like a 12-week class, and they're like, I took a 12-week class. I know what I'm doing. Wait a minute. This is not something you learn overnight. Right? Okay. No, I haven't had my Ambien yet, but I'm as soon as I get off of this. But here's the deal. If you're in the MBC program, if you're in the HIT program, you are getting the foundation for what you need to be successful, right? So that is what will help you springboard your career. Okay, so let's get to this week's stuff because we gotta get off of here. So I know I say this every week, but I have to say this again today. This course, you have 3 objectives. You are learning how to assign codes, you're learning your guidelines, and then you're learning how to abstract and code in patient records. On the CCA exam, on the RHIT exam, they're not going to have records like this on the exam. Okay, in case you were wondering about that, they're not going to have a 30-page handwritten medical record on the exam. They're going to be paragraph formats, some shorter, some longer. Even on the coding exam, not medical records, okay? On the CCA, you're not going to see these big, long medical records. All right, so this week, we got a lot of chapters, and I wanted to remind everyone that you are not to read the entire book. I don't know how many times I keep seeing in my discussion boards where people are talking about ICD-9 codes. For those of you who are, doing your good Google search to answer the discussion board questions, and you're just copying and pasting information from the internet, read what you are posting. Just because the article talks about circulatory diseases doesn't mean it's the rules for ICD-10. So make sure what you're posting is related to ICD-10. And I have sent so many emails to people in the discussion board saying, hey, we're not doing ICD-9, we're doing ICD-10. And now I got a new approach for this week. If you're in my class, you're going to figure out what it is. So if you post something on ICD-9, I got something to say to you. because I don't want you confused. ICD-9 will not be on your exams. And I don't want you to confuse yourself, because while some of the rules are the same, some are different. And I don't want you to be confused. Okay, so we got 4 areas that you have to review for this week. Of course, you're going to have your roundtable, your homework, and your quiz. Something I wanted to mention about the quiz, and let me just, I gotta pull up my notes here. I wrote some notes earlier today. Um, this week you're doing circulatory, you're doing respiratory, you're doing digestive, you're doing skin. So codes that are circulatory, they begin with the letter I. Codes that are respiratory, they begin with the letter J. Codes that are digestive, they begin with a letter K, like kaopectate. And codes for skin, they begin with the letter L. All of your codes for week number 4 should begin with the I, a J, a K, or a L. You shouldn't have codes that start with any other letters on your quiz. So I thought I would just throw that out there. Maybe that'll help someone if they are picking up the wrong code. Maybe they'll remember it's a J, it's a K, it's a L, it's a I, J, K, or L. All right. So from a guideline perspective, a couple of things that I wanted to point out here is that it is very important that you read your guidelines. So, for example, atherosclerotic coronary artery disease and angina. There is a guideline that states that basically we got 2 codes. They either have the coronary artery disease with angina, there's a code for that, or they have coronary artery disease without the angina, there's a code for that. So it's so important, because I see in the discussion boards where you guys are just kind of like posting things without really reading them and retaining them. And I hope you have a new attitude come this week, where you're like, I got to keep reading these guidelines so that I can remember them. And one way, this is such a good tip. Instead of the infamous cut and paste into the discussion board, actually read the guidelines and say, okay, I'm going to talk about, let's see, hypertension and heart disease. Maybe there's a question on hypertension and heart disease. So you read the guideline and then you put it in your own words. Okay, what does it say? Number 1, hypertension with heart disease. These codes, I-50 through I-50 point hyphen. Oh, that hyphen means another digit is required, so I got to remember that. Are assigned to code I-11, hypertensive heart disease, when a relationship is stated due to hypertension or implied hypertension. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Read it again. Okay, assign a code from I-11, hypertensive heart disease. Oh, hypertension and heart disease together. Okay, that makes sense. When a relationship, casual relationship, is stated due to hypertension or implied hypertension. So what does that mean? If the doctor writes hypertension and then says on the next line, heart disease, he did not state the relationship because he didn't put them together. If he said hypertensive heart disease, then he put them together. So when I am doing my discussion boards, if I were you, how do I learn these guidelines? I would read it and make sure that I understand it. would make sure that I understand it, then I would post on it. Because I can tell you, some of the posts that I read, I've read in my journal articles where people are just cutting and pasting from the internet. I'm just going to give you guys a heads up. I know you guys see them as well, where you see these big, long paragraphs from some article, and you're like, wow, that person is so smart. That sounds really cool. They really just copied and pasted from the internet. But just as an FYI, I'm brutally honest. Um, Instructors have a way to check your discussion board posts to see if you copied and pasted from the internet. And if you are caught doing that, you can get a 0 for your discussion board. I'm just putting that out there. Just something to know. All right. So then I'm reading the guidelines, and let's see what else it says. If I'm going to use this code I11, use an additional code from category I50 heart failure to identify the type of heart failure in those patients with heart failure. So how do you retain the guidelines? A, reading them over and over again. B, when you're doing your discussion boards, talk about it in a language that you understand. Like, if this was me posting this tonight, I can see some of you are going to be making this your post right now. I'm going to look at the time that some discussions are posted, because I posted this question in my class earlier today. I would be like, okay, here's the deal, class. Hypertension with heart disease. The doctor must state that these two conditions go together. And if they do, I can use a code from category I11, hypertensive heart disease. Also, for patients that have heart failure, I'm going to assign an additional code for the type of heart failure. So you see how I've read the guideline and I just put it into my own words, right? So then I'm reading the guideline some more, and I'm going to get to my roundtable tips in a second. I'm reading the guidelines some more, and I see number 2 on page 40 of the guidelines, the physical copy, hypertensive chronic kidney disease. And so I see that says assign codes from category I12. First thing my little eyeball would say, oh, I got to be careful because I11 is hypertensive heart disease. I12 is hypertensive kidney disease. Okay, let me keep reading. When both hypertension and the condition classifiable to N18 chronic kidney disease are present. Ooh, there's an unlike note. Unlike hypertension with heart disease, ICD-10-CM presumes a cause and effect relationship and classifies chronic kidney disease with hypertension as hypertensive chronic kidney disease. Okay, wait, let me pause for station identification. So according to the guidelines, hypertension and chronic kidney disease, the doctor doesn't have to state the relationship. I can use that code from I12. But in order to use I11, the doctor has to state the relationship. Do you see what I mean by what you guys have to do to really get into this material? And when you're posting your discussion boards, how you will remember it because you got to type it. You don't remember a hill of beans from a cut and paste game, right? But if you have to read your guidelines and then put them in separately, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Hypertension and heart. If the doctor states the relationship, I can use I11. And if they got heart failure, I'm going to use additional code for heart failure. Okay, if it's hypertension and chronic kidney disease, that's I12. And the doctor doesn't have to state them together because the guidelines assume this relationship. Then on the same page, hypertensive heart and chronic kidney disease, that's I13. So I got 3 codes that potentially have hypertension with some other stuff, but I need to be able to differentiate the difference between I-11, I-12, and I-13. So CKD has a cause and effect relationship. It's implied per the guidelines. Whereas with hypertension and heart disease, the doctor has to state it. So if they say hypertension and diastolic heart failure, can you use I-11? The doctor says hypertension and diastolic heart failure. Can you use I-11? I'm asking you guys now. No. But if he says hypertensive heart disease with heart failure, then yes, because he's connected that relationship. Okay, so very, very important that you guys read through these guidelines. I do not have time to go line by line by line, but does everybody see what you need to do and just how I was speaking them aloud and rationalizing them in my brain? That's what you can do at home. Okay, next up. Respiratory system. Respiratory system. Couple of guidelines here. One that I would like to point out. There's more in the respiratory, but again, I only have a few hours to do this thing here. I'm only supposed to do an hour for the lecture, but I can't do it in an hour. So, respiratory failure is a good one. Respiratory failure. J96.0, which is acute respiratory failure, or J96.2, acute and chronic respiratory failure, may be assigned as the principal diagnoses when it is a condition established after study to be chiefly responsible for the admission to the hospital. However, specific coding guidelines, such as OB, poisoning, HIV, that provide sequencing direction take precedence. One of the things I would do if I were you, before I even read the textbook for the week, I would sit down, read my guidelines, and make sure that guideline is clear in my mind. Then you can go read the chapter and do the questions at the end of the chapter because it will all make sense. And as you're coding, like for the round table, and you see that you got a respiratory condition, just pop over to your guidelines and say, wait, okay, is there a guideline that applies to this code? If not, you're good. So digestive system, there are no guidelines. The guidelines are reserved for future guideline expansion. And what that means is, oh, this is a good final exam question. The four cooperating parties, let's see what their names are. AHA, AHIMA, NCHS, and CMS, those four people, they have not, let's see if how many people get this right on the final exam. I give that tip every term, and I always get people who say, I don't know who the four cooperating parties are on the final exam. At any rate, the four cooperating parties, they haven't decided that they wanted to have guidelines for this. So until they do, we have none. And then lastly, diseases of the skin. You just got a few guidelines here. One that is very, very, very common, pressure ulcers. Pressure ulcers, as you guys know, come in stages, all right? And from a coding perspective, that's something I should mention. In addition to teaching all of my favorite students at DeVry University, I also do provider education. And you probably can imagine that that's quite comical when I meet with the providers. But providers don't know coding, right? So I will be educating a provider, And I'll say, hey, doctor, I didn't go to medical school. My doctorate is in healthcare administration. But can you tell me what the 4 ulcer stages are? They're like, well, why, sure. And so then they tell me what the difference is and how they treat it. And then I'll say, how come you don't write the stage down on the medical record? And then they all laugh because they don't know coding, right? They know how to treat the patient. So it's our job to know coding and to help them understand. We collaborate with the providers. So the ICD-10 codes for pressure ulcers identifies the stages. They identify the site of the ulcer all in one code. If the patient has multiple ulcers, we could have multiple codes. It just really depends. So, in some instances, patients have ulcers that are admitted as one stage, and then it evolves to another stage. So, for example, they come in as a stage 2, and during the admission, it's a stage 3. There's a guideline for that. If the patient is admitted with the pressure ulcer at one stage and it progresses to a higher stage, assign the code for the highest stage reported for that site. So you guys see what I mean by reading the guidelines. You know you're isolated to these 4 chapters this week, and make sure you understand how you are to code them. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I mentioned this last week, and then we'll get to the roundtable tips, is that in your physical code manual, if you go to any chapter in the beginning of your physical code manual, they give you the guidelines with examples, scenarios of how you would code for that particular chapter. Now, it's only like sometimes 3, 5, 6, 7 examples, but to me, seeing the guideline with the coding example, that like seals the deal for me because I can visualize how I'm supposed to code something based on the guidelines. So if you haven't taken the opportunity to look at those scenarios that are directly in front of each chapter in the tabular list, you should definitely do that because that will be very helpful. Okay, so on to the round table. This is my picture for the round table. For those of you that don't come too often, this is how you know I'm getting towards the end. So we are in week number 4. We're in week number 4. And we got 2 patients. Sally, who has a nice typed medical record. And then we got No Name, who has a typed and some handwritten documentation for their record. So let's talk about Sally first. Sally should be easy to do. One thing I want to point out is a lot of these records have a face sheet. And one of the things that I noticed that some people are doing with their medical records is that they're coding diagnoses directly from the face sheet. For example, on the face sheet for Sally, they have pneumonia. And some people say, okay, I'm just going to look at my coding manual and get the code for pneumonia. Can't do that. You have to read the medical record to see if it's just plain on pneumonia or if it's pneumonia with a particular organism. And so when you do that and you read through the record and you look through the pathology report, the laboratory data, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I do see an organism. Enterobacter cocci. Enterobacter cocci. And so the first thing that I would say, well, what the heck is that if I didn't know what it is? And what do I do? Now, I know that you guys do not have the physical book, And the physical book actually has some really cool resources. One of them happens to be a list of the different organisms. Does anybody have the physical book? So if you got one printed, and I'm talking about the textbook, not the coding manual, but the actual textbook. Okay, so in the back of your textbook, did you notice that there was an appendix for medications and an appendix for organisms? No. So in your textbook, excuse me, appendix A is a glossary. Appendix B are abbreviations that you should know. Appendix C is a list of microorganisms. And so, why that list is important is that word enterobacter is on that list, as well as other types of organisms. And the reason why that is important is because, remember I said earlier that um, there could be a million diseases, but each disease doesn't have a unique code. That's a perfect example of a situation where you need to know what type of organism it is so that you can ensure that you're picking up the correct code. Okay, I just uploaded the one for the organisms, and if you want all of them and you're not in my class, I'm just gonna put my email in this box here. You can email me, and I will give them to you. If you're in my class, my two sections, I'm gonna dump them in our Dropbox either tonight or in the morning. But if you're not in my class, if you email me, I will I'll email them all to you. Okay. Hey, somebody sent me an email already. Okay. So for case number 6, um, let's see here. Let me change my slide. There is one principal diagnosis. There is 2 secondary diagnoses and 1 procedure. So let's talk about the principal. The principal diagnosis, after you read this record, you see that it is pneumonia. But it is not just a plain pneumonia. There is an organism that is a part of this pneumonia. So once you guys read through the medical record, I know that it's like difficult to like do all this printing, but I have the paper copy of the medical record. And so one of the things that we talked about previously is if we see an abnormal finding on the lab report, we have to go through the record and see if the doctor stated that organism. And the other thing that you guys have to remember, the doctor may not use the same words from the code book. And what I mean by that, he may use something like gram negative or gram positive. And so while the pathology report is saying something, another word, and they actually mean the same. So if you look at that list that I gave you, Enterobacter, all those different types of organisms that are listed, they are divided based upon if it's gram negative, gram positive, etc. So that's that. The other things that this lady has, secondary diagnoses. She has arteriosclerotic heart disease, and also she is a smoker. Now, let's talk about this for a second. Another trend that I notice is related to smokers. Okay, and I want to try to clear this up because I think there's some confusion. If the person is an active smoker, it's an F code. If the person has a history of smoking, it's a Z code. I think some people are slightly confused on that because there was another situation a couple of weeks ago where some people assigned a Z code, and they oh, I know what it was. Last week. Last week. Yes. I'm glad we're talking about this. I know that this is running long. Again, I have to clear up these confusions so that you guys don't keep making the same mistakes. So there was a person that had an allergy to, I think it was sulfa. And a lot of people were using codes that started with a T versus the history of a sulfa situation. So let's talk about that. Today I have a allergic reaction. Uh-oh, I can't type and talk at the same time. That is one of those T codes. If I have a history of allergic reactions, that equals a Z code. So you see the difference between the two, whether I'm currently having the allergic reaction versus a history of that. The other thing that I want to mention is that, remember, we can't code from nurses' notes. So if the nurse says that the patient has an allergy to a medication and the doctor never mentioned it, generally we don't code it unless you work at an organization that wants you to query the doctor about that particular situation. Now, remember we saw earlier that the allergy code doesn't affect the reimbursement. So in the real world, it's going to go one or two ways. Either we're going to query, and what happens when we query? Does anybody know what happens to our claim? Can we build that medical record out? It's on hold, right? And so it goes on to a report that we call the DNFB, which is the discharge but not final billed. I can tell you, I don't know any hospital that's going to put a chart on hold for a Z code for an allergy to sulfa. It's not going to impact the MSDRG, and I want my other $10,000, right? So why would I put a chart on hold for the allergy when the doctor hasn't stated it and it's not going to impact my MSDRG? So the nurse can write it on there all they want to, and your facility policy in the real world would dictate what you would do. Remember I said in our coding roundtables, we're going to code the floor and not the ceiling. We are not going to query for this because we want to get this chart out the door. And we can't get this chart out the door if we have a query on the table for an allergy to sulfa, and it's not going to do anything to help our reimbursement. It's informational only. It's not like an active allergy to a medication, which could impact our MSDRG. So does everybody see the rationale between why we do certain things that we do? Okay, so one diagnosis, the pneumonia as the principal, two secondary, the arteriosclerotic heart disease. They said that they were a moderate smoker or something like that, so that's a F code. And I just told you earlier that the cardiovascular codes start with an I, so You know, and I told you the respiratory codes start with a J. So you're going to have a code that starts with a J, one that starts with an I, and one that starts with the F. Now, I mentioned that there was one procedure, and throughout this record, and I actually have it highlighted on mine, they are doing this intermittent positive pressure breathing treatment. And for this particular record, we're going to go ahead and pick up this intermittent positive pressure breathing treatment. Pick up the PCS code. We're going to pick it up here, but I will tell you, at organizations, it could be something that's captured by the charge master, but we are going to go ahead and pick it up this time. And I'm going to give you a little hint just to get you started, that it's a code that starts with a 5. And that's all I'm going to tell you about that case. But, you know, things like breathing treatments, the doctor doesn't do the breathing treatment. That's picked up by the charge master because it's the respiratory therapist that's doing that. The IV, that's the nurse that's doing that. Charge master is picking that up. Blood draws, that's the lab technician. Charge master is picking that up. Chest x-ray, that's a radiology technician. Charge master is picking that up. Foley catheter, that's the nurse that's putting it in. The charge master is picking that up. So you see why the organization doesn't want to pay a coder that's making a pretty penny to sit there and code chest x-rays all day. However, they want you to code and pick up things that's going to make them money. So I want you to think about it like this. This hopefully will seal the deal. A radiology technician went to school for at least 2 years in order to be able to provide x-rays for patients. They know whether or not they did a 2-view or a 3-view, or if they did a CT scan or an MRI. It's very easy for them to go into the charge master and charge for those services. You see why you don't need a coder to look up that particular item, but if you got a coronary artery bypass graft, you need a coder to look that up because you got guidelines and all these rules that you have to apply. You don't need a coder for a chest x-ray. Okay. Last case, no name person. So, let's see. At least I didn't see the name of the person. But anyway, this is the one that is typed and handwritten. Case number 14. Yeah, this person is real sick. Came from the nursing home and all that good stuff. So, principal diagnoses is the cellulitis of the foot. They have that documented on the discharge summary. And then this patient has 11 secondary diagnoses, and 3 of them are Z codes and no procedure. So let's talk about the Z codes. This man has an absence of a leg. He has history of UTIs, and he is allergic to penicillin. So those are your 3 Z codes. Absence of a leg, and I gave you some main terms that lead to Z codes. So I hope that you guys are using that list of main terms that lead to Z codes. Okay. So absence of the leg, history of UTIs, which is a Z code, and then allergy to penicillin. Okay. Then the other codes. What else does this man have? Is this a man? Yeah, elderly man. So he has MRSA. That was documented in the medical record. He has diabetes. That was documented in the medical record. He has coronary artery disease, and I'll give you a hint. The coronary artery disease code that you code from that other case is the same code that you're going to use in this case. The patient also has cerebral atherosclerosis. He has dementia. He has organic brain syndrome. He has a rash for some reason. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the history of the FEMGIS, we decided not to code that. That would be an additional Z code. Again, we're coding the floor and not the ceiling of what you can code. So that's basically, what we've decided would be the end result. And it's not relevant to the current stay. Now, possible allergy, remember, according to inpatient guidelines, we can code uncertain diagnoses. Remember that? According to inpatient guidelines, we can code uncertain diagnoses, and there are a few exceptions. But in an inpatient setting, he says he may be allergic to penicillin. We code it as though it exists. The only time we don't code uncertain things would be like possible HIV. We only code confirmed cases of HIV. Possible multiple sclerosis. We're only going to code confirmed cases of multiple sclerosis. Possible epilepsy. We're only going to code confirmed cases of epilepsy. Why? Those conditions can impact the patient long term. So that's kind of one of those unspoken rules in our industry that if they say possible pneumonia, that's not going to kill you to say that you previously had pneumonia. But to say that you have epilepsy can hurt you because you're not going to get a driver's license or get your driver's license revoked. Okay, so let me make sure everybody got those. Cellulitis is principal. MRSA, diabetes, coronary artery disease, cerebral atherosclerosis, osteoarthritis, dementia, organic brain syndrome, rash, and then 3 Z codes. Absence of the leg. He's a diabetic. That definitely is very important. History of UTIs, taking a lot of antibiotics. That is important. Allergic to penicillin. Well, he has an infection. It's important to know that he's allergic to penicillin because penicillin might have been the drug of choice. And knowing that this patient with MRSA is allergic to penicillin, we're going to give him something else. Okay, here's my final slide. I thought it was pretty cool. Keep calm. The end is near. And let me give you guys a copy of the PowerPoint slides. 1 second. Let me figure out what I did with them. This is a very, very, very tough class. And those people who are not listening to the live lectures, the recording, because you don't have to be here live, because the recording you can pause and think about it, go to the bathroom, make dinner, all that good stuff. But those that are not listening or attending, it's very clear as to why they're struggling, because they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Okay, guys, it is 8 o'clock here in Chicago. I thank you guys so much for joining tonight. I hope that you learned a lot tonight, some things that you're going to be thinking about and laughing about later on tonight and this week. And I hope that you guys are really, really, really taking all of the information that's provided to you to heart. One quick announcement. I have moved the rest of the live lectures off of Sundays because I have a couple of events that are coming up. So the rest of the live lectures are on Monday nights at 6 o'clock at this time. And next week is Memorial Day. More than likely, I will do that session early Memorial Day morning. So if you're wondering, am I going to cancel it? Absolutely not. I got too much information to cover. You guys need to hear the information. So just check the schedule. I think I moved them all to 6 o'clock, but more than likely it'll be in the morning before my house gets rowdy. Because technically I'm off work that day, but I'm definitely going to do it. More than likely it'll be 9 o'clock on Memorial Day. And of course, if you can't attend, it will be recorded, but I will be doing it then. So thank you guys so much again for coming, and I'll see you soon.